kind of chilly out here today. I'm in Moab, 42 degrees and it's kind of breezy. But I wanted to do my introduction here for my next video on Moab and uranium, which I came here first in 1978. My husband and I had bought a brand new Jeep CJ7 Renegade. It was white with blue denim colored top and seats. And at 3 weeks we came over here to try it out. So we went and did the White Rim Trail, the Shaper Trail, went down to Canyonlands to do Elephant Hill. But upon seeing the slick rock and not knowing how to drive it, I looked at Doug and said, we haven't even made our first payment on this. We're not doing it. My point to get across today is at the front of the video is the billboard that was outside of the town. Moab Uranium Center of the World. And it most often went by Moab Uranium Center, or capital of the world. So I didn't even know about that, but something jogged my mind, and I remember my dad when I was in grade school saying, I had to quit my job, go out west, buy a Geiger counter and hunt for uranium. In the 50s, it was a big deal. This was a big, big boom, and it was done by just single prospectors or a couple of guys on a shoestring budget. And they came to the Colorado Plateau, which goes into Colorado and New Mexico. But I'm going to talk about the Moab area because the government had bulldozers here, and they were to bulldoze roads into the middle of nowhere so that the prospectors could get in to even prospect. And you can't tell the story about uranium without mentioning Charlie Steen. I'll talk a little bit about him, but that's a big story by itself. And for the last year I've been down a rabbit hole trying to compress this. But when we were out with our Jeep, we were told by somewhere along the line that all these Jeep roads were bulldozed by the government during the uranium days. And so you can't, Moab would not be what it is today had it not been for the uranium boom, because the whole city of Utah is beautiful. But if it's inaccessible, nobody's going to leave the main road. Way back in the 60s, the Jeep Safari started, and people just came over here in flocks. Small flocks in those days, but to go on the Jeep roads. And so we came over to do that. Later, when dirt bikes became really popular, they were coming over here. The Slick Rock Trail was actually built for dirt bikes. It is now for bicycles, and although motorized vehicles are allowed on it. But the Slick Rock Trail system is used primarily all by bicyclists, with the trails for the Jeeps, like the Hell's Backbone and Hell's Revenge, all those named trails. Coming up soon is the this year's Jeep Safari, of which this is the guidebook. It's quite a book. It's pretty big. It's got all the maps and all kinds of stuff in there. It's fascinating reading. That's been going on for 60 years or so. Then we have the Sand Flats Recreation Area, which is where the Slick Rock Trail is. And this tells, it's got Slick Rock Bike Trail, but then it's got all the stuff for the Jeeps too. It's got maps. It's got the other book had maps for bike trails on the Slick Rock area, but then this book from Moab Tourism has trails all around town. The trails are just all over the place. In fact, I'm sitting here in the Lions Park at the edge of Moab, and you can see the trail. It's a recent trail it's been here, but it's newly paved and better than ever. It goes up along the Colorado River a few miles, and then it goes clear around on Highway 191 up towards Arches and way beyond. So however many miles you're up to riding, you can ride it here, and e-bikes are allowed. Now, let's get into Charlie Steen a little bit. He was a trained geologist who had been working for Standard Oil in Texas. He got fired. If you want to research that, you can go into all the finer details. But I'm going to talk about when he was up here living at Cisco, which is about 40 miles up the road, in a tar paper shack, and he had 4 little boys. I think he had 3 at the time. He might have had 4. They got by on almost nothing. They were really, really poor, getting credit every place he could and grub stake stuff, going into partnerships to get enough money to run on. But he had a secondhand drill rig, which he had out south of Moab, about between 30 and 40 miles, and way off the road. Him and a partner went in. The partner had the money to make sure they got a road cut in to where he wanted to drill. And then one day in July, he broke his drill bit off in the bottom of the well. So he gets in his little red Jeep, drives all the way through Moab, all the way up to Cisco, pulls into the gas station where he has credit with a guy. And Buddy was his name, and he was a prospector too. So they both talked about what he got going, and Buddy shows him his ore, and Buddy owned a Geiger counter. Charlie Steen didn't have the money for a Geiger counter. So Buddy runs his Geiger counter over his rocks, and it beep, 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 beeps. Charlie was starting to say he didn't know quite what he had because he's got these blackish looking cores. So he went out to his Jeep and brought some cores back, and Buddy put the Geiger counter on, and just the needle just flew over. Strongest stuff he'd ever seen. So Buddy was there because he needed to go to Grand Junction and try to get some parts to retrieve the end of his drill that was broken off, because he hadn't reached his number of feet down that he had wanted to go. So he eventually gets to Grand Junction, gets that pulled up, goes out and files a whole bunch more claims to tie up his whole area. And then 3 months later, he announces, because in those days, prospectors would find the claims, and then the government would come in and pay them something and take it over. And then they farmed it out sold it to the big companies to do. So Charlie wanted to keep it within his realm, his power, and he set up a company and became a multi-millionaire, which there again, his story's fascinating. He bought a plane. He'd take the laundry to Grand Junction, and sometimes that's told in a way, I think, that they're making fun of him, but he loved to fly. So if you love to do something, any excuse, you'll get in the plane and go. And also because his wife had gone through such a bad time, hard time, trying to get by on nothing and having to wash by hand diapers for 4 little boys. He never wanted his wife to have to wash clothes again. And I think that's quite a nice thing. I'm starting to get blown away. But I think this is a nice setting, and it is cold out here. So I've got a lot of pictures I want to put in, and I'm going home tomorrow to Colorado. I did get over to see Uranium on this trip and meet a woman who runs a museum over there. That might be a whole nother video. She might put together something. The town of Uranium is no more. It was torn up, put in dump trucks, hauled up to a great big hole they dug in the top of the plateau, and buried everything and capped it with concrete. Before I close out totally on my talking part, the mitigation of what Charlie Steen eventually went together with some partners and proposed buying the only uranium processing mill that was ever privately owned in the United States. And it was at Moab. It was called the Atlas Mill. And he did that to help all the prospectors so these little guys wouldn't have to take their ore very far. They could just take it here to the edge of Moab. So in the process of that cleanup, which happened, many years after the fact, it's still going on, of which I'm going to put some pictures. But if you really want to look into that, you get interested in this subject, there's an excellent YouTube video put out by the company that's doing the mitigation project. And it's short, very succinct, and tells exactly what they're doing. Charlie Steen's ore was the most important discovery of uranium ever found in this country and possibly the world. And it still stands to this day. It was very, very high-grade ore. And millions and millions of dollars went out of his mine named the My Vida. He loved Mexican music. He had worked in Bolivia and Peru with oil. And so he named it My Vida, which is my life. And he was very, very generous to the city of Moab. They went through a lot of growing pains. He gave money to the hospital, schools. He built a small subdivision for his employees. He gave huge parties because he wasn't a hoarder. He was a very generous person who wanted to share the wealth. So every year he gave big parties while he had money, because he did go bust. But the last party he held was at the old airport, and it had 8,800 people. And more than that, but that's rough round numbers. And everybody from the whole four corners was invited. So that includes people over in Colorado and New Mexico coming up here. And I'm sure they enjoyed it.